So in my career journey, there are two quotes or two sayings or words of advice or wisdom that have been guiding principles for me. The first one is from the great Madiba. We all know him as Nelson Mandela. And it's this quote he made several years ago. He said, "There is no passion to be found playing small in settling for a life less than the one that is capable of living." That is such a profound quote because it really defines what it means to be intentional. Go big or go home, essentially, is what he's saying. And then the second thing is actually from my dad, and he says this to me every day. I think growing up, I never really understood what he meant, but now I get it. He says to me, "Rolake, pace yourself." He says that time and time again. He's never stopped saying it. And it just really means that you need to ensure that you show up for yourself. You take care of your mental, your spiritual, your physical well-being before you can then apply yourself to that thing which you've been called to do. So yes, those are my two guiding principles in life and on my career journey.
You're watching the Career Series powered by MTN. I'm your host, Talila Doherty Aditono, and our guest on the show is a powerful, multi-passionate corporate powerhouse. She is Rolake Akinkugbe-Filani. She is the Chief Commercial Officer of Mixta Africa, and she's also been recognized by MyPad as one of the top 100 people of African descent, one of the most outstanding people of African descent in the business and the entrepreneurship category. It's so nice to have you here.
Nice to be here with you, Talila.
Yeah, you look lovely.
Thank you, you too.
Thank you so much. So let's talk about, you being in the corporate world, but also being a multi-passionate person in terms of, you play the piano, you teach as well. You're also an anchor, a business anchor on Arise News. How have you been able to balance all of those different areas?
Yeah, thanks. Great question. I get asked that a million times. And my first response is usually to say, I'm not Superwoman, because the reality is, as human beings, we're actually all multifaceted, but it's not everybody that's got to that point in their lives where they know how to channel each of their skills and gifts. But I'm actually very deliberate and intentional. So of course I have a 9-to-5 with Mixta Africa. I have an energy and infrastructure background. So that's always been my thing from a corporate perspective. But I realized very quickly that what will keep me motivated on the job is if I have escape, pastimes. And apart from my piano, I found that I love communicating. I love sharing ideas. So actually getting my own show on a weekend, on a Saturday on Arise News was ideal because it's the perfect blend. You do this hard work Monday to Friday. On Saturday, you get this 1 hour full-on energetic dynamic show where you get to express yourself looking at business and economy. And then I get to spend the rest of the time with my family. And then when I want to, I coach. So in some ways, out of my 9-to-5, I'm still able to get myself involved in things that mean I control my own time. It's not easy, it's a journey, and there's no sort of perfect alignment between all those things, but at least I found my balance, so to speak.
I think that's fantastic. I think it shows that you have a lot of energy as well to be able to move between those different areas.
Yes, I try.
So, in terms of Africa's economy and Nigeria's in particular, there's been a couple of hard knocks recently, as we all know, and we're trying to get back up there. What do you think it would take for Nigeria's economy to enter a sort of proper boom era?
To be honest, I think hard knocks is kind of putting it mildly. We've kind of all felt the pinch. But the reality is, first of all, we have to understand that the challenges Nigeria faces from an economic or governance, political perspective are not unique to it. But because we're sort of primed to be a major transforming agent for the rest of the Black and the African diaspora, we have to get it right. And I think one of the things we really have to look at is the quality of leadership, the quality and the depth of leadership. We obviously need people who are selflessly driven towards the goal of collective upliftment. And that takes character. And I hope that this period in our country's history will be the seal on that. The other thing is we're not short on ideas. Sometimes we're short on execution. We've seen the great plans and the policies. We've seen the various agenda across key sectors. We just need leadership that recognizes how to identify talent and puts the right people in the right positions. I think the third thing is, several years ago, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement came into being. And that was a recognition that individually it's hard to really make an impact, but collectively we have to tap into the wealth of resources we have, both as a country within the West Africa region, but broadly within Africa as a whole. How can we create this one single Pan-African vision of economic growth and sustainable development? And the reality is, beyond government, it has to start with the private sector. Those of us in the private sector need to explore those partnerships. But it boils down to leadership. It boils down to governance. It also boils down to having a transformational vision that can actually be executed.
Fantastic. And what part do you think we can all play as individuals, whether it's, startups or, micro-sized companies? What can be done? Is it, employment, trying to employ more people and doing the little bit that way? Or, what else can be done to transform?
Well, I think at an individual or corporate level in the private sector, SME startup, it's really about accountable leadership. Right? If you're leading a company or leading a startup, you're managing people. You're sort of a microcosm of what it takes to run a country like Nigeria. So imagine these little startups and entrepreneurs being the model of good governance, corporate citizenship in their own rights, and then imagine that at a critical scale.
Yes.
I think the spillover effects would be phenomenal. But more importantly is really how we empower young people. We need to think about what are their needs and what are their requirements. How can we introduce this concept of corporate citizenship and collective responsibility for your society, your community, your local government into what we do? And I think that will take a lot of character and leadership. It would also take investment and capital. And that's a whole nother conversation we can have because, lots of entrepreneurs have great ideas. They've just not been able to find the right sources of funding to help scale those ideas.
Yes, I totally agree. So let's talk about japa syndrome. We know that recently there's been a mass wave of relocations by a lot of Nigerians to the UK, the US, Canada, and a lot of them were skilled workers that played key roles in a lot of, both macro and micro organizations, which have sort of negatively, if we're being honest, affected those organizations. What do you think can be done about that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say that talent is global, right? So we're moving to a place now in the world where employers, recruiters, headhunters look at the entire world as a talent pool. And it doesn't really matter if they're coming from India or Nigeria. We're going where we can find the best talent. And then for the talent on the other side, it's really a case of supply and demand. It's a price issue, the highest bidder. So from that perspective, a lot of the wave of japa we've been seeing has been to the tech world. But guess what? That is seasonal. Look at what is happening. We're seeing layoffs at Google, Amazon, Meta, and the list just continues. So the world goes round in cycles. I am personally not really concerned that Nigerians are leaving. That's actually a validation for the fact that we have some highly skilled people here. My concern is whether we've set up our education system in a way that can serve our future economic needs. So what is the quality of education we have here? How are we churning out graduates? Having said all of that, and I know that sounds, takes a positive spin on it, I do think that there's a more fundamental issue of economic empowerment for young people, which goes beyond whether somebody feels they want to go and work for Google in India or in Silicon Valley. And I think it's really why we're not able to retain and then recycle or cycle out a new breed of talented people from our universities, from our startups, from our businesses. This is having a huge impact. And then the final thing I will say is, if you look at the business environment for your average Nigerian startup, supply chain issues, there's taxes, which aren't always friendly, there's the issue of exchange rate devaluation, there's the borrowing rates in the corporate world. So fundamentally, we haven't done enough to create a conducive environment for those businesses to thrive. So beyond the young people who are leaving, what about the survival rates of those businesses themselves? It's just a natural progression. The people go and then the businesses fall off the radar.
Yes.
So it needs to be a holistic approach to how we scale up our startups, our SMEs, what sort of incentives we put in place, how we ensure that they can get ready access to stable electricity supplies, how we ensure that we have monetary policies that enable their survival and growth over time, and how we create financial support structures for them as businesses. So what we need, Tallulah, is actually a holistic approach to that problem.
Interesting. So the government also has a part to play, is what you're saying?
The government has a part to play, but we often have a saying here in Nigeria that the private sector thrives despite or in spite of the government. Yes, I think the public sector can do a lot. The role of the public sector is really to create the environment. But I think as the private sector, we definitely need to collaborate more. We're seeing more bigger multinationals who are investing in the entrepreneurial ecosystem, and I think we need more of that.
Fantastic, thank you. I want to talk about your journey, in the corporate world and how you've been able to sort of get to where you are, because I know that a lot of the time people look at the corporate world and they think of it as a very long, arduous journey from the very beginning, being a graduate to scale into sort of senior management. So how has that been for you?
Well, the one thing I always say is that, when you're in the heat of something that's happening or in the heat of a crisis, you never think about the bigger picture. You never think like, this is my strategy. When I'm a young 23-year-old, first full-time work, I'm going to get there now. You kind of go with the process. But I've learned that I need to be more intentional and deliberate. So it's everything from mentoring. How deliberate are you about learning? Do you have the ethos of a lifelong learner? Do you understand who you are fundamentally? Do you know your strengths? Not many people actually do that assessment of what is it that I'm actually really, really good at? And how can I apply myself? What is it I'm passionate about? What is realistic to apply myself towards, given the needs of the economy or my industry? And I think for me, the one thing that has helped sustainably is, first of all, I need to build visibility. And many people shy away from it, especially our young women. They do shy away from it because visibility is really key to having those doors and opportunities to open for you. I need mentors. Now, I wasn't very deliberate with getting mentors, but I kind of realized much later in life that I need people who've done and gone ahead of me. And then how am I continuously learning every day? And the final thing I will say, which I discovered, especially when I was covering the energy sector, is all our industries, no matter what industry you are, technology is going to be that one thing that is going to enable those industries to scale and drive. And that is how we're all going to remain relevant. So you may have trained as a petroleum engineer in the oil and gas sector, but guess what? We're now all talking about the global energy transition. How are you pivoting and upskilling your skill set so that you remain relevant to that sector 10, 20 years time? And I think if anybody is thinking about career longevity, technology is going to be a key driver of that. Definitely. Upskilling is going to be a key driver of that. And you need to be very intentional and deliberate about that.
I think, from everything you've said, what I've taken away from, especially this last bit of what you said, is about being deliberate, intentional, and also being aware, like taking time to take stock of your strengths, your weaknesses, and areas where you can grow and
actually,
improve.
There's one more thing is we're so hung up about the end goal, we forget to really enjoy the process. And I often say that sometimes it's in actually putting one foot in front of the other that you actually discover those doors open. So we sometimes have to do the things we don't want to in order to really do those things that we truly eventually want to.
Yes. Fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on the MTN Career Series and being so open, not just about your experience, but also, giving us so much insight into business and, economic policies, and also encouraging us to upskill and to take the time to improve ourselves and do the work to be better in our careers. Thank you so much.
Thank
we
you.
really appreciate you.
Absolute pleasure to live here.
You're welcome.